She thought it would be just another quiet flight, just a few hours of rest before landing. But in the middle of the sky, everything changed. A desperate announcement shattered the calm. The captain was down, and the plane needed a fighter pilot. Now. Passengers froze, searching for someone, anyone who could save them. No one looked at the black woman sleeping near the back, because no one believed she could be the one. What happened next would challenge every assumption and expose truths far bigger than a single flight. Would she be seen before it was too late? Before that flight, she was just another exhausted traveler blending into the crowd. To the world, she looked like a tired black woman in a worn jacket, clutching her boarding pass, quietly finding her seat. But what no one around her knew was the weight of her past, the years she spent breaking barriers as one of the few black women to ever fly fighter jets. She had faced more turbulence on the ground than in the skies, doubted by her peers, overlooked for promotions, and judged long before she ever touched the cockpit. On this day, all she wanted was rest. She leaned her head back, the hum of the engines rocking her toward sleep. Around her, passengers settled in with movies, books, and snacks. Nothing seemed out of place. But in the quiet, a storm was building, one that would test not only her skill, but also whether the people around her would ever truly see her for who she was. Because sometimes, the greatest battle isn't in the skies, it's in the shadows of prejudice. The flight began like any other. Smooth skies, quiet conversations, and the subtle clink of coffee cups from the attendants' carts. She drifted in and out of sleep, finally allowing herself to let go. But then a sudden jolt shook the cabin. The fasten seatbelt sign flickered on, and the steady hum of the plane felt heavier, almost strained. Moments later, a chilling announcement pierced through the speakers. "We need a fighter pilot on board." "The captain is incapacitated," gasps echoed. Passengers exchanged panicked looks. The thought of being trapped in the sky with no one capable of landing the plane was enough to send a ripple of fear through every row. People looked around desperately, scanning faces, whispering names. Some even stood to check down the aisles. And yet, when their eyes passed her, no one stopped. To them, she was invisible, just another black woman traveling alone, far from anyone's idea of a hero. She sat frozen, heart pounding. Every instinct in her screamed to rise, to step forward, to reveal the truth of who she was. But hesitation clawed at her. She had been here before, in rooms where her credentials were dismissed, in situations where her voice was ignored. Would this be any different? In the rows ahead, a man shot his hand up. "I'm a private pilot," he called out. Heads turned in relief. At last, someone. Crew members hurried over, pulling him toward the cockpit. She watched in silence, her jaw tight. A private pilot was nothing compared to her training. She had handled jets slicing through storms, missions where seconds meant life or death. But here her expertise meant nothing, because no one even thought to ask her. Minutes ticked by. The plane rocked harder now, turbulence rattling trays and sending cups tumbling. A flight attendant stumbled down the aisle, her face pale, whispering nervously into her radio. Something was wrong. Terribly wrong. The private pilot hadn't been enough. Passengers gripped their seats, prayers filling the cabin. Children began to cry. Still, no one turned to her. She could feel the weight of every assumption pressing her down. In their eyes, she wasn't the one to save them. She was the last person they'd imagine had the skill, the training, the power to take control. The injustice burned. She wasn't just fighting to save the plane. She was fighting to be seen. Every second they overlooked her was another second closer to disaster. She shifted in her seat, her hands trembling, not from fear of flying, but from the familiar ache of being underestimated. How many times had she been told she didn't belong in the cockpit? How many times had her uniform drawn more suspicion than respect? Even here, in a crisis where her expertise could mean survival, her skin and her silence rendered her invisible. And then came the moment that made her decision for her. The intercom crackled again, the desperation in the co-pilot's voice unmistakable. "We are running out of options. If anyone has combat or fighter jet experience, step forward now." The cabin fell silent, every eye darting around in panic. Hope was fading. The reality was setting in. If no one stepped up, hundreds of lives could be lost. Her breath caught. She could no longer wait for someone to believe in her. This was bigger than prejudice, bigger than fear. The question was no longer if they would see her. It was if she would let them survive. And with that, she began to rise from her seat. She stood, her knees unsteady, but her resolve unshakable. Dozens of heads turned, eyes narrowing in confusion, some even in doubt. Whispers darted through the rows. Her? A black woman rising in the middle of chaos? Some passengers looked away, others outright frowned, as if she were out of place in this moment of crisis. But she didn't stop. She moved steadily down the aisle, ignoring the weight of their disbelief. At the cockpit door, a flight attendant blocked her path, panic written across her face. "Please, sit down," the attendant urged, her voice trembling. Behind her, the man who had claimed to be a private pilot stood pale and defeated, sweat glistening on his forehead. The truth was clear. He couldn't land the plane. Still, hesitation filled the air. How could she possibly do what he couldn't? Her chest tightened. This was the moment she had lived a lifetime for. The moment to prove, not to them, but to herself, that she would never let their blindness define her. Her voice cut through the chaos, firm and commanding, the same tone that once carried over roaring jet engines. "I am a fighter pilot." "Let me in." Silence fell. For a heartbeat, doubt still lingered in their eyes, but the violent lurch of the aircraft shattered it. Oxygen masks dangled, passengers screamed, and the entire cabin tilted as the plane lost altitude. There was no more time for prejudice, no more room for hesitation. The co-pilot's desperate face appeared in the doorway. He looked at her, studied her, and in that instant made a choice that everyone else had been too blind to make. He stepped aside. She entered the cockpit, the smell of burnt electronics and panic hanging in the air. Her hands touched the controls, familiar and steady. Outside the windshield, endless clouds and a sinking horizon stretched before her. The lives of everyone behind her now depended on whether they believed or not. And with one deep breath, she prepared to take command of the skies. The moment her hands wrapped around the controls, the chaos outside seemed to fade. Training took over. She steadied the aircraft, adjusted the altitude, and guided the massive jet with the precision she had once commanded in the skies of combat. Every second was a fight against fear and gravity, but within minutes, the impossible became possible. The aircraft leveled, the panic quieted, and hope returned to a cabin that had nearly surrendered to despair. When the wheels finally screeched against the runway and the plane came to a trembling stop, the cabin erupted, not just with relief but with disbelief. Strangers stared at her as if seeing her for the first time. Some whispered apologies, others simply lowered their heads in shame. For so long, they had looked through her, past her, around her, never once considering she could be the one to save them. But now their lives had been placed safely on the ground because of the very person they had doubted. For her, the landing was more than survival. It was vindication. Every dismissal, every quiet prejudice, every time she had been told she didn't belong, it had all led to this. Yet the bitter truth lingered. Why did it take a near-death experience for them to recognize her worth? Why did her skin and her silence blind so many from the truth she carried all along? This flight wasn't just about one emergency. It was a mirror. A reflection of how society still overlooks, dismisses, and underestimates people of color, no matter their skill, their history, or their strength. So the question remains, how many more lives, opportunities, or voices will be ignored before we finally see beyond prejudice? Because sometimes the hero we're waiting for is already sitting among us, unseen, unheard, and underestimated, until the world has no choice but to believe.